So the purpose of this video clip is to focus on the marginal economics of milking and fattening late calving cows. And it's a follow-on from the series where I've already presented to you. So if we look then at the marginal value of the milk that the late calving cows produced over the winter period, the period starting on the 15th of December, we've said already that the March, April, May and June calvers produce roughly 500, roughly 780 or 870, 1260 and 1780 litres per cow from the 15th of December. For the March calvers for 30 days extra until the 15th of January. For the June calvers at the other extreme, it's for an extra 120 days until the 15th of April or thereabouts. Assuming a total milk price of 32 cents per litre for all of their extra milk that they're producing over the winter. The milk value per cow varies from 150 to 570 euro per cow, depending on the length of time that they're in milk. In all cases, we're assuming a milk yield over a 305-day period of 6,500 litres. Now, from a feed and forage cost and overhead cost perspective, the longer the cow is in milk for, the more expensive it's going to be to maintain her. And remember that her diet will be made of additional feed and forage that's coming to feed her in milk production. So in the diet, we assumed that the feed was an additional 5 kilos of concentrate fed per cow per day at 30 cents a kilo, and an additional 3 kilos of high quality silage as well. On top of that, valued per kilo at 15 cents of dry matter. And on top of that, we built in an additional overhead cost for milking those cows of 50 cents per day in milk. So the feed and forage costs then obviously depend on the duration of the additional indoor milk producing period, which for the March cows was 30 days. And at the other extreme for the June cows, it was for an additional 120 days. So the relevant costs, or the relative costs, then went from 74 to almost 150 to around 220 to 294 days, or 294 euro for the extra feed, forage and overhead costs for the cows milked throughout the winter. And that leaves an additional margin for milking those cows on of 82 euro per cow for the March calvers, 134, 185 and 278 euro per cow for the March, April, May and June calving cows. So if we look then and extrapolate it a little bit in terms of the total costs for the scenario where we had 34 March calvers, 15 April, 9 May, 3 June, or a total of 61 cows milked over the winter for varying periods of time. There's the extra milk sales, the 46,000 litres of extra milk from our 100 cows initially. There's our extra milk sales value, 14,892. There's the feed and forage costs bulked up for the different numbers of cows in the different categories. And our extra margin for those cows comes out at 7,300 over and above the feed and forage costs. As I said before, herds with a good calving pattern will have lower costs, much less milk produced after the 15th of December, and a much lower marginal because most of their margin and a more profitable margin has been achieved during the main grazing season. So in the scenario of very high fertility rate in the herd with only 20 cows in 100 calving in March and 10 in 100 calving in April, the extra margin total is not 7,300, it's actually 2,993, just shy of 3,000 euro. And finally, the fattening costs is the last thing we have to look at. This is what additional margin is there from finishing those cows after they're finished drying, after they're finished milking, compared to selling them out of the milking parlour. And these cows were in good condition at the point of exit from the milking parlour when they were finished milking. So, for example, the cow that originally calved in March was then dried off in January of the following year and given a month's dry period where she was on 10 kilos of dry matter intake per day just to dry her up, followed by a 60-day finishing period where she got ad lib mostly silage or grazed grass where it was available, And assuming a 570 kilo initial weight at dry off, which would equate to a maintenance sub-index for a mature cow of around 15 euro. So assuming she was 570 kilos at dry off and at €1 a kilo was worth 570 euro, our finishing cost included is 174 euro. When you add those two together and take it away from a carcass value of 840, that was a 271 kilo carcass, an O3 carcass with 43% cut out, and the value we used for her was a value of €3.10, which is a 4-year average cull cow price. The margin over finishing for that cow was €96. The 4-year May value of the cow was 330. The 4-year June average was 322 a kilo, and a 3-year July average for the cull cows killing an O3 was 317. So that has an effect on carcass value. Finishing cost for the different dry off and finishing dates is lower down here as more grass goes into the diet. The value of the cow as she was dried off, but before she was fattened, rises for the April and again for the May and June calvers up to €1.20 per kilo live weight at this stage, because they're being sold out of the parlour in March and April when they're closer to the grazing season and they'll command a premium price. But the margin for the cows is relatively small. It worked out at between 40 and 96 euro per cow. So when we put all of those things together, we have our marginal milk value for each of the different groups, each of the different categories of cow. We're assuming we sell all the originally May and June calving cows finished off the farm. So there's an additional margin for the 9 May calvers that were all finished. There's an additional margin for the 3 June calvers that were all finished. And we assume that 10% of the March calving cows were finished the following year. The rest of them turned up in calf again. And we assume that there was 20% empty rate or culling rate in the April calvers. So we culled 3 cows that were finished off the farm. And that gives us a total margin for the milk and finishing of €8,500, €8,473 by milking on the cows over the winter through the spring, and by subsequently finishing all the May and June calvers and some of the April and May calvers.